Welcome, and this is going to be the last lecture of chapter 14, and we're going to look at section 4, and this is going to help you complete the culture aspect of your spice chart. So the focus here is going to be on Islamic values and cultural exchanges, and this is going to be probably one of the more significant sections of this particular chapter because this is going to have influence throughout the societies that we're going to study in later chapters. So by the end of this lecture, I want you to be able to explain how Islamic values and culture were shaped. And I want to again support your evidence and your explanation with evidence and reasoning. Okay, so you're going to use your spice chart to tell me the impact that these ideas had and why these ideas developed. So it's not just about taking notes on what people believed or what they did, but how that came about and why that matters. And so again, like I said, section 4 focuses on Islamic values and cultural exchanges, and a couple of things that you could see in this picture to kind of preview what this chapter was about. You see Muslim scholars. They are writing, they are producing texts. You see another one where they are studying, and in this middle picture, you could see them studying globes, and you could see them studying measurements, geometry, maybe some astronomy, maybe some mathematics. And then Arabic, which is the writing, is what you see in that third picture. And so these three things are going to kind of drive the cultural developments you're going to read about. So Islamic values were formed largely from the Quran, which is the scripture, the quotes, the revelation of Allah to the Prophet Muhammad. But then there were other texts like the Sharia and the stories also that came from the stories of Muhammad from other followers. So these texts kind of form the basis of Islamic tradition. And because the Quran was written in Arabic, Arabic is going to also spread. So with the spread of Muslim empires, we are going to see the spread of Arabic throughout the Muslim world, throughout Dar al-Islam, because Muslims believed that reading the Quran in its original language was the best way to understand its purity and not losing things in translation and appreciating the beauty of the poetic composition of the Quran as well. And those of you, and I've mentioned this before, I think in another lecture, but in Spain, a lot of the al words in Spanish are Arabic. So when Muslims spread into Spain and took the Quran, they took the Arabic language with them as well. And so Islamic judges and missionaries and communities would spread these values to the societies they interacted with. Often they would get jobs in the courts of local authorities and then use those positions to promote the values. They had formal institutions. They would create schools called madrasas to teach Islamic values. And by the 10th century and through the 13th or 12th century, you begin to see much more schools that we would today consider like universities begin to appear throughout Dar al-Islam. And rulers would often support these schools because they would provide them with educated administrators, people to work in their government with them. So Islamic theology and Islamic law were used for administrative purposes. And then one thing that contributes to this at this time is the development of inexpensive paper that we talked about in the previous sections. That enhanced the scholar's ability to be able to spread people's views. And one of the most significant and important groups that spread Islam were the Sufi missionaries. And Sufis were different from the other Muslim followers because their focus was more on mysticism. They didn't find the formal teaching of religion and memorizing scriptures or memorizing things or having certain rules especially valuable for spreading Islam. They focused more and concerned themselves with the fine points of the doctrine. They wanted to get people to devote themselves to Allah. So they looked for more spiritual ways of doing that, singing, having these rousing sermons, dancing, and they would live a more ascetic life. A lot of them would give up a lot of their possessions, and through their devotion, people would be inspired by them, seeing how they were devoted. It would inspire other people to devote themselves. So Sufi missionaries are going to play an important role because they emphasize that devotion and they allowed people to worship Allah in their own ways. So especially when Islam is going to spread to lands that already had strong religions like India, like East Africa, Southeast Asia, Sufi missionaries are going to play a role because it's going to allow people in those lands to maintain some of their pre-Islamic traditions and not have to do a lot of the strict observances that the Muslim rulers or the more Islamic traditional scholars and qadis and caliphs were were imposing on their people. So Sufism becomes one way, and Sufis are still around today. That picture is of modern Sufis today. So this group of missionaries still exist. And you could compare this when you read chapter 17 to like the Franciscan missionaries, the ones that built the missions here in California, like the mission in San Diego and the ones in Baja California, right? Where they followed a form of religion where they would also live an ascetic life. Ascetic means you give up a lot of your wealth and positions, live a very simple life, and try to inspire people through devotion. One of the ways that Muslims brought cultural unity throughout Dar al-Islam is by promoting the 5 pillars. And one of the 5 pillars of Islam is the Hajj. And the Hajj is to go visit the holy shrine in Mecca at least once in your life if you're able to do so. And so the Hajj creates this cultural unity because no matter where in the world you are as a Muslim, one of your ambitions is to one day visit this shrine, to one day go to Mecca. And so even today, you see this picture and you could see it full of followers. And what you see in this picture here are these tents with air conditioning, because this is out in the Saudi Arabian desert. It's very hot. All those tents are air conditioned. Followers, Muslim followers from all over the world report here for the Hajj, and they have to be separated by country. They have to have a time when they're going to go into the mosque and visit the shrine. So all these tents are part of the organization done by the Saudi Arabian authorities to accommodate the pilgrims in the modern world today. And this is, the Mosque of Mecca in Mecca is the largest mosque, and you could see here the mosque itself, and you could barely see in the middle of that circle, you could see the shrine, the Kaaba, and then you could see the modern skyscrapers in the background. Now, if you are a non-Muslim, you are not actually allowed to visit Mecca. So there is a road, and when you're on the highway, you reach a split, and if you are non-Muslim, you have to remain on one road, whereas Muslims are allowed to enter the city. So that is how sacred this site is. And to give you an idea of, the size of today's Hajj of the pilgrimage, this is a picture of all the tents where all the followers are waiting for their pilgrimage. So Islam is one of the world's largest religions. I want to say it's like 1.2 billion followers. Don't quote me on that. You could easily look that up. But people today, it's one of the most important aspects of the religion is to make this pilgrimage to this holy city of Mecca at least once. And so rulers at the time built inns along the roads. They set up police on the routes to make sure that the pilgrims traveled safely. And that provided cultural unity. So the beliefs of Islam, no matter where Islam spread, provided a cultural unity for the Islamic societies and for Dar al-Islam. Now, Islam, because it spreads to other societies, it starts in the Arabian Peninsula with semi-nomadic tribes, but because it spreads to areas that had strong civilizations and rich cultural traditions, Islam is also going to be influenced by them. So the Persians are going to influence the artistic developments, the political organization, the way that the empires rule over large areas of land and organize into different districts with different administrators that are responsive to an emperor. The idea that the ruler is benevolent and wise and should have absolute power. These are all Persian ideas, the Persian techniques that had been around in Persia for over 1,000 years. And so Islam is going to change depending on the land it goes to, and it's going to bring in these influences. From India, it's going to borrow a lot of mathematics. Indian mathematics, science, medicine is going to capture the attention of Muslim scholars, especially as they interact with the Indians in the northern states that were conquered by Muslims, like the Kingdom of Sind. They were attracted to the mathematics and the Hindi numbers that then the Europeans called Arabic numerals, and this is the foundation of our numbering system. Remember, Europeans were writing in Roman numerals, X's and I's and V's and C's, etc. These numbers that we are more familiar with come from India via Muslims. And so using Indian mathematics and calculations, they're able to concentrate on developing and advancing trigonometry and geometry and algebra, which is an Arabic word, eight, right? Remember I talked about the 8 words. And this is one thing that's important to also understand and why this is happening, because at this time, European society is doing the opposite. It's going away from knowledge. Europeans had developed mathematics, the ancient Greeks had developed science and medicine and observations of the stars and geometry, philosophy. But during the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church becomes very authoritative in Europe, and it's going to have an influence in what people are allowed to think. And usually, thinking outside of what religion wanted you to believe was not acceptable in medieval Europe, in early medieval Europe. That is going to change as we approach the Renaissance, and you'll read about that in later chapters. In the Muslim world, people believed that Allah made people in his image, that God made people in his image, and therefore learning and acquiring knowledge was not seen as being anti-God, anti-Allah. It was seen as people achieving what Allah wants humans to achieve. So their view of how their God views knowledge allowed them to embrace these ideas and advance a lot of math and science and medicine and map making and astronomy. They also draw influence from the Greeks. They draw influence from Greek mathematicians. Remember the Greeks had developed, the Pythagorean theorem. Euclid was a mathematician. They studied those mathematics. They were also studying philosophers. Plato talked about a world of forms and ideas, this idea of a physical world that we could see and touch, but then this ideological world that exists in our head, right? And that philosophy about trying to understand the things we don't see or the things we don't know. Although that wasn't well received by a lot of the Muslim authorities. But scholars were still attracted to these ideas. They were also attracted to the works of Aristotle. And Aristotle tried to explain the world in a rational way by only looking at observation and rational thought, right? So these ideas that today we know, today we study the Greek philosophies of Aristotle and Plato a lot in philosophy classes, and those works were able to make it to the present day because they were translated by Arab scholars. So their interest in the Greeks allowed them to translate all these works that probably would have otherwise have been lost. And when the Europeans begin to start taking an interest once again in knowledge and in scholasticism towards the High Middle Ages, they're going to turn to Muslim translations and Muslim scholars for these influences. So that's going to happen in the 13th century, as they're going to try to also harmonize Christianity with Aristotle's view. So these contributions from the Persians, from the Greeks, from the civilizations that were already established, allowed for this powerful cultural thriving throughout the Islamic world. In the capital of Baghdad, they established the House of Wisdom, right, where people from different parts of the Islamic realm went to go learn. And so the Muslim civilization during this period experiences what's called a golden age. Sometimes it's referred to as the golden age of Islam during the Abbasid period. And it's going to play a role in transmitting a lot of knowledge from India, from East Asia to Europe. So when Europe will experience a renaissance, a lot of that can be contributed to the developments that were happening in the Islamic world as well, in terms of thought that would later emerge as humanism. So by reading section 4, you should be able to explain to others how Islamic culture drew influences from the societies they interacted with. And you should be able to understand who the Sufis were and the role they played, and why the Sufis were able to spread Islam into lands throughout Africa, Southeast Asia, India, right? What was it about Sufi practices and its flexibility that allowed them to spread the word of Allah to other lands? Okay, so that's what you should have gotten from this section. I hope you understood this section well and this chapter well. And again, like always, I am here for questions of things you do not understand. Have a good day.